it was 6 months of living in transition in the city of Wilmington. We were remodeling a home, and so we stayed in 3 or 4 different Airbnbs. We got here in the summer, and so we had to figure out a summer rhythm, and then we had school starting. We had to figure out a school rhythm. We were meeting new people. We were gathering people interested in this church, and the church was just an idea. Like, it wasn't even a group of people yet. And so this transition, as exciting as it was pretty chaotic in a lot of ways. What about you? How have you experienced living in transition in your life? For some of you, you're in transition right now. You're waiting for something that you don't exactly know how it will materialize. For others of you, you're anticipating something, thinking it will materialize one way, but you're just not sure yet. For others of you, as you stand in this transition life, you're dealing with rejection. That things haven't worked out like you planned. I bet you've said, whether you're experiencing transition now or you have in the past, I just can't do this for too much longer. I bet you've said that because it's a shared human experience. The reality is, we weren't made to be people in transition. We're made to be people with a home, a place to rest and worship, a place of fullness. Yet, on this side of heaven, so much of our life feels like we're in transition. There's actually a way to think about this theologically. That we're living in the already. We have Jesus, we get to worship, we know His grace, but the not yet, that this place is not perfect. It's not wonderfully holy. There is still thistles and thorns on this side of heaven, and so we live in this transition in so many different ways. But I wonder what this transition does to us, even to the point where we might have a tendency to forget that we were made for something more beautiful, something more stable, something with a sure hope. Do you forget that sometimes with the worries of this life? As people who are genuinely pursuing Christ, our greatest temptation is not to throw off all the concerns or all the moral imperatives of what the Bible teaches us. It's actually to find that for most of our lives, we're just kind of standing in this transition between one circumstance and the next, instead of pursuing a deeper relationship with the person who made us, Jesus. So just some questions, right? We like to ask a lot of different diagnostic questions here. These are basic ones. Are we too busy? Are we too distracted? Are we too worried? Are we too frustrated? Let me free you up so you don't feel like the spotlight is on you. Yes, to all of those things. We are too busy and distracted and worried and frustrated. All of this will happen to us. And so we can think about this both individually but also corporately, knowing that we are people in need. There's a big difference in the chaos of transition and the rest that comes in relationship with Jesus. Now, Paul, he ends this passage that we just read in a way that I think is really helpful to direct our study this morning, where he says, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." There are a couple things going on here. Evil wants to overcome us. That's a really bad thought this morning. It's like, it's already hard enough to get out of bed. The thought that evil wants to overcome us is just adding to that, but it's true. Paul's telling us that. Don't be overcome by this evil that is active in this world. Even though we know in Christ that the power of sin has been dealt with. We've been talking about this in the book of Romans. That the power of sin has been dealt with fully. We still feel the presence of sin, don't we? We still feel the evil in this world. Paul is talking to the Christian here. He's talking to the Roman church. These are people who have followed Christ through adversity, through division, and he's telling them to not be overcome by evil. This is a message to the Christian. Of course, for the Christian, we have hope in eternity. If we went back and read chapters 1 through 11 in the book of Romans, we would read wonderful truths about how nothing can separate us from the love of Jesus, how Christ has won. He's won in suffering, in our sin. Jesus is the Redeemer. Yet, Paul still feels the need to tell us to not let evil overcome us. And I think it's because Paul's being really gracious to us. He knows for the Roman church and for this church that heaven can feel really far away. That this transition that we live in this life can feel really far away from the glory of heaven. To live as Christians in this world is to feel and to know our tendency on this side of heaven. In the brokenness of this world, we have a tendency to believe that these places of transition are our homes. Instead, Paul is calling us to run to the place where we can pursue the goodness and the beauty of a life lived out by the power of the gospel. To pursue a better and more beautiful way of real, practical, and abiding, growing in His grace in our daily life. Are we standing in a place of inaction? Are we becoming comfortable in this tyranny of transition? Or are we pursuing goodness and beauty and truth, even imperfectly? All of chapter 12 and 13 are about this. Are we standing in the middle where discipleship and formation goes to die a slow death in this no man's land? If we are, here's what will happen. We'll be robbed of joy. This is a place where healing from trauma will remain stagnant, where we'll tell ourselves that our sin disqualifies us from service and growth and hope. You know these feelings. And this message today is not about 3 steps to change and become better and to figure it out. This passage that we read is actually patiently walking us through tangible, gritty pursuits of what it looks like to pursue Jesus imperfectly, to be changed by His grace and given a hope for all, even though we will still find ways that are still lacking. I love how Phil prayed, baby steps cause rejoicing. That 1/4 steps are what real spiritual formation is made of on this side of heaven. That none of us are professionals, but that all of us seek to be practitioners of the grace that's been given to us. On this side of heaven, we will tend towards this no man's land. And so the gospel must be our directive force. We need direction in our life on this side of heaven. This passage lays that out 2 ways. Gospel direction within this community, within this church, and then also gospel direction outside these walls, into this world that doesn't know Jesus. First, we see here in 15 and 16 that we need gospel direction inside of our community. There's 2 avenues for this: real sympathy and real humility. Look in verse 15. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Having real sympathy and joy for people who are mourning, people who are celebrating, is a mark of God being active in the life of a church. Another way that Paul is saying this negatively is that there's no room for envy in the life of Christ, but rather we should be pursuing pure joy for our brothers and our sisters. Now, we're talking about programming today, right? This is where we go from programming being the driving impulse of our growth as a church to the gospel actually saturating every step we take as a church. The gospel at work in real sympathy adorns our programming as a church. It adorns our worship as a church. Look at this old gym. This is an old gym from the Boys and Girls Club. That's why there's a scoreboard up there, okay? It's not like keeping track of how good or bad I'm preaching. This is an old gym. This week I was having coffee with a friend who remembers that this was a Boys and Girls Club, and he walked in, and he said something to the effect, he's my age, so he probably didn't say it this way because we don't talk this way, but he said, man, this place used to be ratchet. Did I use that right? Kind of, okay. It used to be awful. It kind of used to be run down. But what happened? This place has been adorned. Sarah and Dakota from Plant Outpost came up and they hung these up. Different people painted murals and they painted and they put the bar in and they put these offices in and they made this place more beautiful. They installed HVAC that we know sometimes works like it should. What happened? This place was adorned with beauty. Now imagine all of those adornments being sympathy. in the life of the church. That when we become sympathetic people to our brothers and our sisters, we are adorning the gospel in whatever programming and structure that the Lord decides to do in this church. Real sympathy. You cannot program it, but it adorns all that God leads us in. How can we be pursuing, celebrating, and weeping with one another? I think these are some important steps. We first have to find contentment with what we have. We cannot be sympathetic people if we're always yearning for what's next. The world is begging us to want more, but the gospel says, be content with all that I've given you. And that's the starting point of sympathy in the life of a believer. And as we pursue contentment, because none of us will ever arrive there fully, we have an opportunity to root out, to confess when, not if, we play the comparison game. We do and we will play the comparison game. And I'm not just saying like the person's house next to yours comparison game. I'm talking about in this church comparison game. Paul, in these two verses, 15 and 16, is talking to a local community. You will be tempted to play the comparison game in this church, and it will undercut relationships. It will push you away from true sympathy in this church. But to find your identity and your hope in the gospel lets you find contentment in the good news that God has for us, and then it will help you to move toward people. And as you move toward people, you will discover that all of us struggle, that all of us have desires, that all of us deal with disappointment. When we experience the results of sin in this world with our brothers and our sisters, what begins to happen is we grow in compassion and empathy and sympathy. And then we get to learn about their hearts. You see, this is what the gospel looks like in the ministry in a church. We learn about their hearts and their hopes. We follow up in prayer with tears and with celebration. One of the greatest gifts in this season in this church for me personally has been being in our dinner and prayer group and sitting around in a circle and praying for one another, but also being on a text thread and praying for one another, carrying and bearing our burdens with one another. This life is so much more beautiful and full, but this will not happen if we believe transition is our home. Have you ever experienced anyone crying with you, hugging you with the joy of a brother or sister, you being called to be in this with your brothers and sisters at this church as a call of the gospel? And I actually think this is the next great opportunity for our church because we're beginning to get to know each other. And anytime in any relationship you really begin to get to know each other, it gets a little more scary, doesn't it? Do I commit? Do I want to be known more? If we can walk with Christ to corporately become a church that rejoices with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep, the fullness of the Christ life will be experienced in our hearts. It'll be experienced in our homes, and it will flood into the streets of this city. Real sympathy adorns the gospel. But there's also a real humility at work here. We see that in verse 16, where Paul says, "Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight." We talk a lot about humility at this church. We've said from the beginning, we can't plant this church without humility. I don't know if Paul intended this. I'm not even sure they called them sandwiches when Paul was writing this, but he's given us a humility sandwich here. The two pieces of bread kind of serve on how we internally think, how we think about others and how we think about ourselves. Real unity is when we say, or what Paul's commanding us to not be haughty, to not think of ourselves more highly than we ought, he says earlier in chapter 12, but to think of ourselves soberly. Internally, how we think of ourselves with real wisdom, to never be wise in your own sight. And then you've got the meat of the sandwich, how we externally serve and relate to others, that we would associate with the lowly, with those who are different or struggling. Real humility is actually this humility sandwich is calling us to think and to do. And so what's your tendency? Do you overanalyze or do you just act? Do you process the situation over and over in your head? Do you play out every possible scenario in the name of wisdom, but you never actually act on it? Or maybe you're like me. Let's go and get it done, right? Do you speak before you think? Do you jump to solve problems before you've considered the nuances of the issue? The beauty here is that Paul is saying, yes, you tend towards those things, but those things can actually become gifts in community. The way that Paul positions humility here, he's calling all of us to be people who think and do, calling us to see our tendencies, our personalities, and how we relate to others as we are redeemed by the gospel. Humility becomes the soil for sympathy to adorn the work of God with one another. And this is beautiful in imperfect community. Do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. We need this gospel direction within this church. But Paul doesn't stop there. In verses 14 and then 17 through the end, we actually need gospel direction outside of our church community. What were they up against? What were the Romans up against as Paul's writing this letter? Tons of persecution, tons of confusion, and a little bit of division within the church. And Paul's main thrust here is that these people would not seek revenge. Look in verse 17, repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. Paul Barnett, a Bible teacher, he talks about revenge. He says revenge occurs in two stages. First, there is the festering wound with plans for getting back at the enemy. Then there's the actual execution of the planned revenge. He says that Paul urges against both stages. Don't fester and don't go and enact revenge, but I think Paul actually takes it a step further. He boils it down better for us. Watch your thinking, watch your doing, and pursue the good, the true, and the beautiful. When we forget the calling to watch and pursue, outside forces will be our direction. This is so important for us. This is where churches get off kilter, politically, culturally, selfishly. So what does it look like to walk in holiness as a church with those outside this church? It's to flee and to pursue. Verse 14, flee from cursing, but actively bless. Actively be people who pray for one another. Verse 17, we just read it, flee from retaliation, but honor those outside the church. Let me ask this question, and this is hard. Can you honor the image of God in someone whose lifestyle makes you uncomfortable? What I'm not saying is approve of everything that everyone does. I'm not saying bow down to the cultural desire that your truth is truth and you're good. Not even close. Gospel truth from the scriptures is truth. But as we relate to those outside this church, can we honor the image of God in the lives of people we're getting to know, even when we disagree with them? What does it look like to honor them as image bearers, that we might have deeper relationship with them so that they might actually hear us? They might actually know the love of the Father. We flee from cursing, we seek to bless. We flee from retaliation, we seek to honor. We flee from stirring conflict, but seek to be peacemakers. Look at verse 18. I love how realistic Paul addresses this. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. He knows that peace is not just up to one person. He knows it's hard. He knows that confusion and misunderstandings will happen. And so I love that he's realistic about what it looks like in the life of a believer to live peaceably with all, that it's hard, but it's worth it. That we should be peacemakers, not stirring conflict. Verses 19 and 20, flee from vengeance, but trust in God. We cannot just rely on our positions in life, our good theology, or our giftedness in this world. We are a highly competent church, but our competency is not enough. It never will be. We flee evil. We pursue blessing and honor and peace and trust with all of these competencies, these gifts that God has given us. And here's what will happen. Just two quick examples. When we pursue blessing, we will become a blessing. People will seek us out in prayer. They need something bigger than themselves, and they will see God in us. And we, as a kingdom of priests, will go to God for them, praying that God would rescue them from the temporary struggles of their life, but ultimately for eternity. We will become a blessing when we seek to be a blessing. We, as we pursue trusting in the Lord, we will be trusted on this side of heaven. People will seek us out for wisdom. Do not discount the work of the Spirit in you in your places of work. As you live ethically and in holy ways, as you talk about the truth of the gospel, even in small, do not dismiss this world as desperately wanting to connect with something bigger than themselves. They know that the world doesn't have the answer, but they will sense in you the goodness and the truth and the beauty of the Holy Spirit. It's my greatest honor when people come to me who are not Christians, who are not people at this church, and they say, I'd really love to talk with you about some things I have on my mind. Or, hey, can I just get 2 minutes with you? And then like 37 minutes later, we're crying together. That's not just the job of a pastor. We are a kingdom of priests that we would go on behalf of another person before the throne of Jesus and plead God's grace over them. You know, as the gospel points us into a direction in our spiritual formation, as we walk in this direction, the Lord works both in and through us. Christian formation, discipleship, it's not like reading a novel that we get lost in, even though reading novels are just really wonderful. Discipleship is a journey in real life, and we will live it imperfectly. There's this video of, I'm guessing that the kid's 12 years old, and he's in his karate class, and so what's in front of him seems like this impossible feat. He gets blindfolded, and he's supposed to spar against this man like twice his size. And so 12-year-old, grown man, he's supposed to spar, and then he has a blindfold on. Doesn't seem very fair. Talk about limitations. I think it's easy for us to feel like that boy, not seeing anything, but experiencing something coming against us. We feel the limitations of our time, of our intellect, of our budgets. We feel the limitations of the difference between our desire on one side and our capacity on the other. That what we desire, we just can't seem to reach. And that can be totally disorienting. It can cause us to give up or feel like we'll die trying. So did this boy even have a chance? I don't know if he was going for a new belt or what was going on. Did he even have a chance? Do we even have a chance? The video goes on. You can tell that he's fighting earnestly. I mean, he is like determined. I don't know if his mom gave him a pep talk beforehand, but he was going to do everything in his power to take this grown man down. He's trying to feel around him. He's trying to maintain his composure. You can tell he's giving everything his 12-year-old mind and body can give. Do you ever feel like that? How about when you hear this command to not be overcome with evil, but to overcome evil with good? You live earnestly. You pursue all these things that Paul has talked about. You seek to be a blessing, but it still feels like you're blindfolded in this life. Now, here's what happens in that video. The guy that this little boy is sparring against speaks to him. And there's this great moment where this little boy, like you see his head kind of like perk up differently when this man speaks to him. It's a voice that this little boy seems to recognize, but it's not the person he thought he was fighting. And so the man speaks to him again, and here's what happens. The boy takes his gloves and he throws them down. He rips off his blindfold, blindfold. And what you see is not him fighting the man, but diving deeply into him, hugging a man who's in an army uniform who had just gotten back from being deployed. He was surprising his son. His son was blindfolded and he was sparring with all that he had, but not with a fighting posture now, but with the biggest hug you've ever seen. His dad had snuck in to surprise him. Do you think that little boy even vaguely remembered that he wasn't able to win that sparring match? Do you think that he was replaying his moves and decisions from 30 seconds earlier, trying to get the next belt? No. He was overwhelmed with the embrace of his Father. You see, as we pursue the works of the gospel inside and outside this church, we've got to remember that our ultimate direction isn't the list of do's and don'ts. That we're not measured by the programs that we hope will change the city and our hearts. And no matter how hard we fight, we will never be able to overcome evil in and of ourselves. The real work of formation begins when our eyes are enlightened. I once was blind, but now I see. Our direction isn't a list, but a person. The person of Jesus who changes everything. And that's what we experience here in this sacrament. Every week we are people who try to live like people who have blindfolds on. Fighting earnestly, swinging earnestly, trying to do the best that we can. And every week in this sacrament, we have the opportunity to take those blindfolds off and to experience the good news of Christ to us in the bread and in the wine.